All right, mic check, I'm good. So I'm Max Ceron, CWB Association Welding podcast. Today we have a really cool guest, Welding podcast.
The show is about to begin.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the CWB Association podcast. I'm Max Ceron with you guys again for another great episode. Today we have a world famous man who's been all over the place, and you know I've come across your name a few times in my life, and I'm glad I finally got to meet you in the role I'm in today. We have here Rich DePue. So Rich, how's it going?
It's going very well. I'm glad to be a part and look forward to it.
Awesome. So for the people who don't know who Rich DePue is, let's talk about Rich. So where are you right now from this interview? Where are you sitting right now?
I am just south of Buffalo, New York, a little town called Springville. A lot of folks maybe don't know that, but when I mention ski country and Ellicottville, New York, they know that because a lot of folks come from Southern Ontario to go skiing in a little town called Ellicottville, which is about halfway between here and Buffalo.
Okay, and where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, one of the suburbs of New York City. Back in the 60s when it was, very different than it is today. Sad to say, I vividly remember being 4, 5, 6, 8 years old or whatever, and mom letting me jump on my bike and just go until it got dark. And you just can't do that today. I worry about my daughter in the city, and she's a full-grown adult.
You know, and Brooklyn's got an amazing history. There are so many movies and history that comes out of that area, and a lot of it's not positive necessarily. Some scary stuff happens in Brooklyn, you know?
Well, all the boroughs, anytime you got a big city, LA, Chicago, Toronto, internationally, yeah, you get that many people together and
Stuff
it's
happens.
different times for sure.
So what's your connection to Canada then? So you said you were born in Brooklyn in the 60s, and you know you cut your teeth lots in Canada. Lots of Canadians know you. So from young Rich, born in Brooklyn, where'd you go from there?
Well, when we got to school age, my parents met. My dad was in the Navy, and he got stationed in New York, and my mother was a native Brooklynite, so that's where they met. And when it got to be school age, my dad was from a rural farm south of Buffalo, right about where I'm at here, and so it was deemed necessary for young Richie to grow up in Western New York, dairy country, rather than the boroughs. So they moved us back to my dad's family in south of Buffalo, and grew up there and on a farm. So learned how to drive tractors and milk cows. We milked between the family farms probably 120 dairy cattle, and we had apple orchards, and so that's where I roamed. Vastly different than the city, so it took a few years, but and then I really got my welding niche. The light really never went on until about the 10th grade. It came to some decisions, and luckily I had parents that were realists enough to make me believe that I'm not going to be an NHL hockey player or a pro baseball player. So, what's your backup plan? And I went to an agricultural mechanics school and learned how to drive heavy equipment. That'll come to play in a few years, I didn't know it at the time. And I learned to weld. And this is my message to welding teachers all over is I learned to weld, and I had an instructor that saw the lights go on. And he really fostered, even though it was an agricultural mechanics program, he fostered my desire to weld. And whenever weld jobs come up, I got them. And whenever there was partnership projects with the welding program, I got to do those. And I have him to thank for sitting here talking to you today at the early age of 10th or 11th grade. So to skip ahead to answer your question, I worked in the nuclear industry for a lot of years. That gave me a really good quality control background, and got my college degrees, and spent some time as managing director of the American Welding Society, and teaching AWS courses, certified welding inspector, radiograph interpretation, things like that. And that's where I met up with folks on Canadian jobs there. I did a lot of auditing. When I left the American Welding Society, I developed an auditing program, and a lot of experienced Canadian NDE guys will know the ASNT TC1A document. The American Society for Non-Destructive Testing is the document that governs non-destructive testing in the U.S. And it's pretty much you make your bed, you sleep in it type deal, unlike in Canada where you've got CGSB and CWB and they regulate your certifications. Here, the companies regulate their own certifications for building their own product. And I had some experienced guys that helped me understand that NDE companies in the U.S. operate to ASNT TC1A, and they build their bed, but they go off and inspect other people's products. And so I built an auditing program to do that. And there's a fair amount of that type of work in Canada. So that's how I got started in Canada initially, was auditing NDE companies.
Okay, so let's go back a few steps. There's some interesting things you said there. So first of all, you said you got your degrees. So what do you mean by degrees? What did you go to school for?
Well, I originally went to school for vocational education because I knew I didn't want to work in the nuclear industry my whole life. I was a maintenance welder specialist in the nukes, but I'll back up because I got a unique start to that career. It's a head scratcher for me. But when I graduated high school agricultural mechanics, I was an operator, and I was a pretty good operator. I could pretty much run any kind of piece of equipment you put me on. And I got a job at 19 running a 100-ton overhead crane handling spent nuclear fuel assemblies at a nuclear fuel reprocessing facility south of Buffalo. And so that kind of worked on me. That was a stressful job. I did that a few years, bit into maintenance, and I could just see that I wanted to have a family, and if I'm gonna retire out of this line of work, I need to get smarter. So I got a degree in vocational technical education. Then I got a bachelor's degree in organizational management, and then I got a master's degree in professional education. Technical education, and then did some post-master's work in school administration and business management and things like that. So, I had enough field experience and industry. I needed the other side of the coin to offset my industry experience.
And that's so interesting because I believe that too. I believe that too. I feel like, the trades are a fantastic route for people. I am 100% obviously supporter of trades and trades education, but I don't feel that you need to pick one or the other. Like, it's not like they battle each other. The university is not against the trades. The trades aren't against universities. Honestly, the people that are out there really making a difference are people that can kind of navigate both worlds. You know what I mean? And it's like I always tell people ask me, like, what was the point of me going to university? And I think one of the biggest things about me that I learned in university is sitting down and shutting up, because in the trades, there's a lot of, back and forth communication and talking, and learning in the trades is very face-to-face working together. But learning in university is a lot of just sitting down and listening and learning to listen properly. And sometimes I think that I've worked with fantastic people in the trades, and I look at them, I go, you just got to listen for a little while, man. Just chill out, like.
Yeah, and both career paths, you've got to make the best of it. You
Mhm.
can't just, I get so many young people, how do I get a job doing what you're doing? And I say, well, boy, where do I start? If you want it, if you want me to tell you in 3 words how to do it, pay your dues. Those
Yeah.
would be the 3 words. But whether you're in the trades or you're in the university, both of those career paths, you can flounder if you think you're just going to ride. If you're just going to get a nice job, in a nuclear maintenance facility where you learn quality control and you learn from amazing millwrights and machinists and welders, and that was my, I was blessed to have older guys that took me under their coattails and helped explain why I need to preheat, that joint before I weld it, and why we have to follow this procedure and do this and do that, because as a young buck, let's just go get it done. And it's like you said, no, slow down, and the same with university. Them professors, if you want to sit there and flounder and be satisfied with a C or a B or not coming in today, okay. So you've got to buckle down and make the best of it if you're going to succeed.
Okay, that's awesome, and I agree with 100%. 100%. It's a common idea, especially once you start teaching the welding programs or the fabrication, whatever programs in or in colleges, tech schools. You have the students, and you say you have your 20 students in front of you, and I say this to my classes all the time. Everyone in this class has an expectation of where they're going to be in 5 years, and having money or a truck or a car or a house or whatever it is that you're dreaming of. But look around you. Everyone's competing. You guys are friends in here, but you guys are competing for the same jobs. So what's going to set you aside from the one next to you? What's going to make you remarkable or rememberable to the employer? And that's a tough thing, because like you said, some people finish school and they think they're just going to go out there and make 100 grand. I wish.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and then not only that is being compatible, being humble, being willing to learn from somebody else, being willing to admit you're wrong or admit you don't know
Hmm.
something, or admit somebody's got a better wrench in their box than you do. So and then fixing that issue, either by going to them and tapping them on the shoulder and say, hey, give me a hand here, or just taking notes and doing it better next time. But yeah, it starts with the attitude, and so much of when I teach whether it be a Canadian level 2 or an AWS CWI or film interp, whatever it is, the first thing I'm going to say is, I can tell you what you need to pass this test right now. I kind of along the same line with pay your dues, is have a good attitude. If you don't have the right attitude for why you're sitting in this class, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle with maybe the written aspect or the testing aspect of becoming, an inspector, a teacher, a welder, whatever it is.
So you went to school, you started, like, you started off in the trades, went back to college, ended up back in the trades. And you talked about the difference between American testing systems and Canadian testing systems. And this is a Canadian show, and we've had quite a few Americans on here, and this is something that I like to discuss, because sometimes Canadians don't understand, because here in Canada we're so regulated. Like, we're regulated top to bottom, left to right, in every direction. And people here complain about that regulation a lot, but they perhaps don't see the value of it. And I've worked lots overseas and outside of Canada, and I very much miss the regulations sometimes when I'm outside
Yeah.
of the country. What do you feel is a big takeaway or difference between, say, the American self-regulating system and the Canadian regulated system?
Yeah, for sure. I've enjoyed conversation with great people in Canada at the Bureau, and in Fort Mac, and all over the country, and even internationally, where we're on neutral ground or where we're in the States. And yeah, you were accurate in calling it self-regulating, but there is a lot of people in this world that are welders, they're inspectors, they're engineers, and they don't necessarily have the full scope of what they need to do to be in proper compliance with documents. And, as when I was auditing companies in the States and auditing companies in Canada, I'd have the same company that had offices all across Canada in the big cities, I had to take a bush plane, to get into some of these locations where they're doing NDE, and same in the States. It was not that different. Yes, U.S. is self-regulating, but we still have codes and standards to follow, and the AWS structural code D11 is almost verbatim with W59. And the biggest difference between those standards, and there's guys out there in the US and Canada that that know more about it than I do probably, but I'm generalizing in that the paths are very similar, if not remarkably similar, in that 47.1 represents chapters 3 and 4 of D11, which is qualification, and the rest of the codes are design and inspection and non-destructive testing. So the systems are similar, very similar, and the self-regulating, to your point of you wish you had the structure back again. I'm with you there, because a lot of companies think they're doing things right, and they're not, because there is nobody overseeing them, and it costs a lot of money for non-compliance reports and to get things right. So it's a double-edged sword. You got to be careful what you wish for, no matter which side of the fence you're on. But as far as the workforce, the documents, the standards, the protocols, the field techniques and tricks and strategies, it's the same. I mean, I never skipped a beat working in Canada. I was able to work side by side with guys that you wouldn't know either one of us were from different countries. It's besides maybe which hockey team you root for, but you get that in the States as well.
And that's a fantastic point, because one of the most valuable lessons I learned, and this is 100% me being a cocky Canadian welder who had worked his way up into my roles that I've had. I was overseas in Ghana, and I was sent out there to help train a whole bunch of welders for a mining company, Goldfields, which is the largest gold mine in West Africa. And you get this idea in your head that you're going out to this area, and for the people that don't know, Ghana has basically no standards. They borrow standards from other countries as needed, but they have no centralized governing body at all to govern their welding practices. So these mines hire people just off the street, give them a welding rod and a helmet, and say, get down there and fix this thing. And there's no training. And people are dying. Like, it was crazy. So I had it in my head that I was going to go down there and just like knock their socks off and just show them all this cool stuff. And when I get down there and I start talking to them, and I get my class together, and you start kind of in the theory in the classroom talking to people, and they know nothing, right? They know nothing about theory, nothing about the systems of what, even basic, like, why do we have a gap? Why pipes need bevels? Because they're just welding pipes just butted up against each other with no bevels. And of course, they're blowing apart in 10 minutes, and they just didn't have that theory. And I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? When we got out onto the floor, and I gave them 2 beveled pipes, and I handed them a rod, a 7018 and a stick, they laid beautiful welds.
Yeah.
Because you know what? People like to do a good job. And it doesn't matter where you are. A good welder is a good welder. Yeah, maybe they didn't have access to education like we have so much, access to here in North America, Canada, US. We have schools everywhere. We can learn the right way. These countries don't. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability, right? And I mean, a course that would take me 6 weeks to teach here in Canada, I was done in 2 weeks there. Like, they just picked it up like that. Like, they'd been welding 20 years. They just had no one ever show them why it needs to be done a certain way. And I brought that back to Canada, and I looked at all welders differently. It's like, I can't, I got to get off my horse. I got to go back to kind of like the start where I started, and just think like, basic skills. There's no you're better than me, or you just might know more, but that doesn't mean I can't learn from you, right?
Yeah. I had a very similar experience in the outskirts of Istanbul, Turkey. I spent a lot of time in Turkey and Malaysia and Saudi Arabia, and it was unique because the contrast was amazing. You would have very highly skilled people and good technology in this company, and you go over here and they've got a newspaper with little holes cut in it and sunglasses but the work ethic was the constant. These guys, I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s in Turkey, and spent a lot of time, the better part of a year there. And these guys, I want to say they were making in the neighborhood of 10, $15 a month is all they made. And I go over there. I don't know what I was making at the time, but I was a trades guy, so I was doing decent. But it just almost make you sick to think how hard these people work and how much respect they have for you. For me coming over as an American, as somebody international, as somebody, a lot of times bigger in stature and
a superstar.
And just and one of the things that really synced me with these people, other than my welding ability, when we put the hood down and I walked a cup up a 6-inch pipe, okay, we were speaking the same language there. But they took a bet around the one company of what kind of vehicle I drive back home. And I went into the lunchroom. The first day I went into the lunchroom in Sefaköy, Istanbul, Turkey, they had a McDonald's bag set up because, I was American. He must eat McDonald's. And, I didn't want to insult anybody, so I choked down that Big Mac, which didn't really taste like a Big Mac. But but they had on the wall pictures of automobiles. And I was supposed to go up there and point at the one I had. Audis, Mercedes, Corvettes, Rolls-Royce, all these different things. And it's like you don't have a 21-year-old F-150 up there. So we searched around and I found the one that is mine. I says, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll bring my vehicle and I'll put it on your wall here. And I put up there that, beat up old F-150 Ford pickup. And, they practically come up and hug me, because I can weld.
Yeah.
I'm a guy, I'll eat what they eat. And I'm driving an everyday ordinary vehicle. And so it's coming back to something we said a while ago of being humble and being willing to bring yourself down to the level of people you're at, trying to want to be there, to want to assimilate with people and learn from them, whether you're across your own home country or whether you're across the border.
It's that whole welding community that unless you're in the welding world, and you know what, I've never seen the welding community in any other trade like it is in the steel trades. We have something around the world that is unique. It's really beautiful.
It is. Once you get introductions out of the way, and you put your work boots on and you got your FRs on and you go through the safety video and you're out, in the field, where's the American? It was astonishing though, being in the Middle East, how quickly they could pick you out, over there. I'd like to think, in the middle of summer, I've got a little bit of a tan going on. I'm wearing jeans. I'm wearing a work shirt. Where are you from? Chicago, New York, LA? He's like, how come you didn't ask this guy that? I don't look that different than him. At least I didn't think so.
Well, I'm from South America, so in North America, I'm a brown guy, right? I'm easily picked out as a brown guy. When I was in Africa, I was a white guy, and so they all called me the white guy, and I was like, I'm the white guy? I've never been the white guy before. All right, this is the perfect time to take a break, so I hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. I'm having a ton of fun. We'll be right back after this words from our sponsor with Rich DePue here on the CWB Association podcast. And we're back here with Rich. I'm Max Ceron with you guys on the CWB Association podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We've been having a great discussion, kind of talking about where you started, some of your international experience, some good lessons and banter. Now, with the second part of the show now, let's get into kind of where you are now. So, you and I feel like I'm just compressing your life, which is unfair to you because, we could probably talk about this for days, right? But you have X amount of experience. Now, I first professionally worked with you in terms of meeting you with the TIVA conference and what's going on in Texas now with the CWB Association. So I guess what's going on in your life with Texas, Southern US, or what kind of things do you got on the brew now? What roles do you fill?
Well, I've got a fair amount going on. I still do a lot with the Bureau. I'm engaged heavily in development and authorship of work for the Acorn Learning Curriculum.
With Trent,
I still do a lot of review and not as much actual development work on level 1 and level 2, because that's pretty much up and running. A few years ago, there was a lot of development work in restructuring and bringing up to speed level 1, level 2, and supervisor. I don't teach. I used to teach those courses quite a bit a few years ago. I actually hooked on with the Bureau full time for about 2 years when Acorn was just a seed, and pun intended.
It was about 6 years ago, I think, is when it
Yeah,
first started
it
rolling.
was
Yeah.
it was just a pipe dream, and I came on board as with Bruce and Ken as some of the first developers of that program, and practically lived in Milton writing that program. So I'm still intimate with it. I do believe firmly in that program. I think it's one of the best, if not the best, curricula out there for a lot of reasons. Not just for what it
Blowing
looks
smoke.
like, but I see decent, if not below average, welding teachers move up a notch because of the quality of materials they have to work with. So that's why I'm a believer in the program. And I don't consider myself a salesman, but when you have a good product, and the things I'll tell Trent and Gia is, if you want to market curriculum in the States, give me something to teach, and that'll sell itself. So I do a fair amount of teaching in the States using the Acorn materials when we can, and I do a lot of that. But to get back to your question, I've got, just in Texas alone, I've got about 600 schools that I oversee the professional development of the teachers. In the States, similar to the lack of standardization we talked about earlier, kind of a step going that direction. There's some federal initiatives in the States to mandate licensure for welders in high school, in post-secondary. Not quite like Red Seal. If there's one area where you guys got it over us, it's the apprenticeship and the Red Seal program, where guys don't just go learn how to run beads and call themselves a welder. They really go through the rigors of learning the trade. We don't have that yet in the States, but we're trying to do that. So that's one of my big missions, is trying to create more apprenticeship type programs and borrowing from that program. But I spend a lot of time in Texas. I still teach welding inspection courses around the country. I still do a lot of field work and pipeline work. We've got fracking and natural gas here in the Northeast, and there's a lot of oil and gas in Texas. So I still get out in the field on pipeline work. I occasionally audit an NDE company or qualified procedures, qualified WPS, and test welders. So you got to stay active, got to stay in the field. The industry will pass you by if you spend too much time in the classroom and don't get back to reality a little bit. So that keeps me busy.
Such a good point. Staying on the tools is something I say to people all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I still have my company, and people are like, "You still got your company?" Like, I at one point my company was like a real shop with like staff and everything, but I went back into like the administrative world. I didn't give up my company. I still got it technically, and I still pick up jobs. So summertime, I open up the garage, I put out some tenders, and I pick up some work, and I build things for people, because you want to stay relevant, and you also want to keep up with like the guys on the floor. You want to figure out who's out there, kind of see who the movers and shakers are, and what the new things are. And that's important for people to do. Like you said, if you stay in the office too long, the world kind of passes you by.
Yeah, for sure. You need that interactive. I can't stop teaching. I used to teach a lot in Edmonton with some great people. and met a lot of, that's where you probably hear my name come around, is because I taught a lot of AWS, CWI, and a lot of level 1, level 2 supervisors. ABSA, I went through the Weld Examiner program because I think it's phenomenal. I think I've met so many welding inspectors in the US or in Canada, especially in the US, who are proud to say, I'm a CWI, I'm an AWS certified welding inspector. And they can't explain why you radius the corners of a bend strap 1/8 of an inch, or they can't explain, technically, how to do a macro etch or a nick break test or tensile test. And it's a shame that, you lose. That's why I said at the beginning, why are you taking this class? What are you here for? You're here to get a ticket? Well, I'm here to make sure you're safe in the field, because if I got to work with you, I'm happy to have you get that ticket, but I got to make sure the material
Enough.
and so that's why I really believe that ABSA Weld Examiner program is great, because you can be a good inspector and not necessarily know how to qualify procedures and people. So
And that's known to be a tough course too. Like, it's not an easy course to pass.
No, I had a lot of respect for that. It's not something I think I'm going to go this weekend and knock that out. I mean, it's a year. It really is the better part of a year to get all 4 of those papers under your belt and to study, and especially if your goal is to be good enough at it to teach it. And the entity I worked for at the time, that's another reason I got into it, is they wanted me to teach it. So it's like, being an American, I'm not going to do anything less than go take that full course and knock it out of the water and really understand, all the language. And being that it derives from ASME pressure vessel stuff, it was pretty easy to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of connectivity there.
Yeah.
So now going back to the experiences you're having in Texas, you said there's 600 some schools in the Texas area, which is a lot. Texas is I think the largest state in the U.S. and lots of ground to cover. Lots of resources and industry as well, which will drive the schools a lot of the time. What do you see as being some of the biggest challenges and hurdles that they have in the school system down there?
Oh man. First of all, 620 or so schools, that's just the schools that are utilizing me and my company. I own a company called Certified Welding and Testing Company, and I'd like to think my goal is to properly train inspectors and examiners. I want to properly train people on being a welding inspector and testing welders and procedures and understanding, how to read film and do a macro, do a bend, do a break, and all this. And whether in Canada or in the U.S., or for a company, a lot of big time companies. I do a welding inspector school here in the Northeast for natural fuel gas distribution, and we get 200 inspectors. A lot of these natural gas companies will shut down for 2 weeks, and they give me all their inspectors for 2 weeks, and we do what you and I are doing here. I mean, we just get down and dirty, and it's like, we're not just going to read how to do a tensile test out of a book. Go in the booth, weld up a V-groove, and let's strap it out, let's prepare it, and let's pull it, and let's do the math, and let's open up, a standard, section 9 or a standard, and see if it complies. And that's what's missing in a lot of public education, is we're teaching kids how to weld. Probably a lot can be said for US and Canada. We're teaching kids to be good welders, but you got to be more than that. Now, you can't just go into an industry and think, just because I can lay down a stack of dimes or I can walk the cup, that I'm going to be, somebody's, answer.
Yeah, the superstar on the floor.
You need to be able to run equipment. You need to understand standards and codes, and you need to bring more to the table. And the biggest challenge I find is properly equipping teachers with teaching strategies, equipment, attitude. Just why do this? Why put a kid in a booth and make sure he knows how to pass a 3G, bend test? Because that's what he's going to have to take to get a job. And it's fun to build trailers and build barbecue pits and fix equipment, but you need to be able to pass that weld test before you can get yourself a really good job.
And having instructors armed with not just adequate knowledge but above average knowledge is so empowering for them, because it helps their confidence. You know what I mean? Because if a student comes up to an instructor and the instructor doesn't quite know the answer, that shakes the whole foundation of the whole system. I had a really interesting experience. 2 years ago, I went out to a small college, and they actually, had gotten some funding and had a bunch of nice newer welding machines. And the instructor was a high school instructor who never had taken a welding program, but had been teaching the weld program for a while. And, I just kind of went out there to do kind of as a chapter, just went out there to see and help. But we did a little presentation. And I said to the instructor, kind of, away from the class, I said, these are pretty good machines. I think they were XMTs, Miller XMTs. I'm like, these are good machines. They do everything you need. And he's like, yeah, but we still have lots of problems with some of the stuff that we're figuring out. And I'm like, well, how often do you make sure that you guys are using the right arc force, or the inductance on the MIG when you're doing the open roots? And he looked at me, he's like, arc force, inductance. And I said, well, that dial right there. He's like, I've never known what that knob is for.
Yeah.
And I thought that's so interesting, because this is not new. That arc force dial has been on there for 40 years. And you're telling me that in 40 years, no one's ever told you to play with that knob. And that's a big issue in the industry, is that you got to know the tech. Those features on the machines are not for nothing. Right. Millions of dollars of testing goes into these features on these machines to make your job easier.
Yeah.
Use them. And that's a very common thing in the weld industry, and especially in schools, is that the students aren't learning even a tenth of the possibilities of what they could be doing. They're just getting good at the basics. And not that that's bad. Laying a bead is important, but the more really shows up when it's time to problem solve.
Well, and even the I'll challenge that even the basics aren't getting there. You take, there's verbiage in the pressure vessel codes, US and Canada, that say if you weld on a certain thickness of plate, you're qualified from this range to this range, unless it's short circuit GMAW. Then you're only qualified 1.1 times the thickness you test on. Well, I ask inspectors all the time, how do you know that wire feed machine right there is that guy's welding in a short circuit mode of transfer? What's short circuit mode? It's and I mean, that, as a nuclear guy, I mean,
that's huge.
With me today, it's a lot of back in the day, because I'm nowhere near the welder I used to be. But back in the day, let me tell you. So with me, it was a lot of back in the day. But back in the day, it was all low hydrogen and TIG for me. Stainless, Hastelloy, Inconel, and carbon steel, low high, and GTIW. So I never even had to put a spool of wire on a machine or pull a trigger until I got into education. And that's about the time I got my CWI, my inspector licenses. And when I came upon this verbiage, I didn't know the answer, but I recognize it as a big red flag. And how am I going to know? How do you know when you walk in a shop that somebody is welding in a short circuit mode of transfer? For sure, to the point where you're going to shut them down if they are not. So that's a half an hour discussion, so we don't have time to get into that. But that could be a reason to come to an education conference or a class, and I'd be happy to arm wrestle about that one.
And that's 100%. Like that's something I've done a bit of work in the U.S. and I've talked to welders down there, and they've expressed sometimes the frustration of the lack of networking. I mean, the AWS does a great job of creating journals and getting the research out there, but they don't do a lot of like the get-togethers like they did. And that's the same issue here in Canada. Like the CWB Association hasn't been as connected as it was, say, 20, 30 years ago. And I got hired to try to fix that. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to get around. But having those communal learning engagements as higher level instructors or as instructors is important, like the educators conference we have in Canada, which I don't know if you've been to one, but they're a fantastic time to be. I mean, we're just planning ours right now for the beginning of June. One of the things that I'm looking at as the association as we move forward now with new projects is I'm very serious, and I'm working on it. Literally, it's on my computer right now here on the side. Is I'm figuring out how to get the Texas area a chapter, right? We're looking to see how we can do it, and there's a lot of legal end stuff on my end that I got to figure out before we can do this, but I'm working on it because I think that there's huge value, not just as in like Canada's going to show the US how it's done. It's nothing to do with that.
No.
It's about bringing in more minds, getting more
Yeah.
minds together, because we all can learn from each other. And Texas is such an industry rich area that that's just a no brainer. Like, I mean, we could have some of the best and brightest out of the Texas area coming to enrich our Canadian, education, and hopefully it's a back and forth street. That's something that we've talked about off, interview. What do you feel about getting a chapter down there, or what are your thoughts on
Oh,
that?
I'm excited. I used to be really active with AWS. I mentioned at one point being a managing director of education. At one point, I was a section chairman over maybe an 8 or 10 year period of probably 10 or 15 different entities. One, because I like to start up student chapters at
Hmm.
universities and tech schools. And there was a lot of small time chapters, but like you said, they're pretty much a thing of the past. Just because time and money and travel and who has time to be a volunteer, to be an association anymore. That's they'd love to, but it's just hard to make it happen. So I'm really excited to make it happen in Texas. We've got the infrastructure. We get together twice a year under normal circumstances,
Hmm.
and we network. And yeah, I have been to a CWB education event. I went, I believe it was in Winnipeg, well, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it was no different. I mean, we went out and had pints, after the day, and we talked about welding problems. We talked about hunting and fishing and hockey and rock and roll, and it's no different. Once you
Yeah.
put the boots and the hood on, we're all the same. And the same with guys coming to Texas. We've had a lot of people from CWB and contacts I've met, in Fort Mac or in Alberta, that have come to Texas to our events and
Hmm.
have a great time. And I get asked all the time by the guys and say, when's Bruce coming back to Texas? Bruce James, he's
Yeah.
retired from CWB now, but very good friend of mine, and one of very few people that I can really sit down and talk metallurgy or talk
Uh,
NDE or something.
yeah, Bruce is really, really smart.
Yeah.
So you were in
And
Winnipeg. I was
so,
actually one of the speakers at Winnipeg, so I hope you liked mine if you remember me.
yeah, it was fun. I
Yeah.
I bring up one of the little exercises we did there, and we could save it for a dangler here, but
Hmm.
we did a little exercise at that event with teachers, and it was about doing visual inspection of welds and grading welds as a teacher. And I use that example almost every time I'm with a new group of teachers on how to grade student welds effectively, quickly, and not make a production or not, give it its just due. And it was a fun experience. I look forward to coming again if I can ever cross the border.
Well, it'll happen, and we have the educators conference. Like I said, it's in development. It'll be running the first week of June, and it'll be virtual. So I'll make sure that the invites go out
Okay.
to you guys. Um, and hopefully by then, hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll have all this worked out with the chapter. So, hopefully we can have a Texas rep
Yeah.
there at the event for the first
Absolutely.
time.
We're gonna have a wrestling match over who gets to go. These guys are looking forward to an opportunity to come to Canada. We may, that's why, and I was dead serious. I sent you an email how many guys
Hmm.
could come, not necessarily on CWB's dime. I mean, I got guys
Yeah.
that said, my travel, yeah, I've it's sad. There's going to be some Canadian instructors that'll their jaw will drop, but we've got some welding teachers from districts in Texas whose welding budget for high school education is $100,000.
Wow.
And so these guys, where are we going? Are we going? When are you
Yeah.
going to take us to Turkey? When are you going to take us up into to see oil sands as opposed to drilling for oil in Texas? And
Hmm.
so Yeah,
And that's fantastic because here in Saskatchewan we have pretty good budgets. Like we're not a poor province. We got lots of oil and gas and mining. So every educators conference, our entire staff would go. Like all 10 of us would get up and get plane tickets to go out to the educators conference. And then you run into the other schools. Sadly, sometimes schools have really low
yeah,
budget and they're
yeah,
struggling just to get one instructor there, and you feel bad. But honestly, if 30 instructors from Texas come, no one's gonna say no. Like, I mean, that's just fun.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we'd get that many, but I definitely think when times get
Get a
normal,
few. Yeah.
I can definitely see a few of us venturing up there.
Well, that'd be a lot of fun. And maybe someday we could start having a bit of an exchange with us, maybe coming
Yeah,
down there too, because that's something, like, I know myself as the association lead now. I really want to get out there and shake the hands of the people I want to work with. Get people to know me, and like and just show myself, pay my due. Right? Why am I in this
yeah.
seat now?
Give
Why
back.
why? Yeah, why have I been put into this position? I just started off as a welder like everybody else. I didn't start off with no big dreams. I just wanted to feed my family. And, now I'm here. So, that's kind of the connection that I think I have, like everybody else. Like, I got my boots right there and my welding helmet's right behind me. I'm ready to go. You know what I mean? So, and,
Yeah,
and let people know that, because that means something.
yeah, for sure. It's so important to give back and to share with young folks and let
Hmm.
them know we've been there, and the things that we've got to say are going to help them get there. Should
Yeah.
should
And they
they
should all
want to
have the same
listen.
opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So now with Rich's life, where do you see yourself now going forward? You're talking about some of your best friends are retiring. Is there a retirement dream in the future, or kind of what's the
Yeah,
plan?
for sure. For sure. I've got, 15 acres plus, here, and apples, and I like to get outdoors. I've got grandkids. I've got I could almost put a baseball team of granddaughters together, and we've got our things we got to do when they come over. I go down there. So that's life coming full circle. So I do need to scale back. I need to, and COVID is kind of done that. It's forced our hand, right?
Hmm.
There's no trips to Fort Mac or internationally in the future. Even Texas is uncertain. We've got a welder
Hmm.
certification rodeo coming up in April, where typically we would cycle 900, 1,000 kids through taking an open route V groove test in one day. And rodeo style, they get a name badge, the plates are all prepped, and they go in the booth. They got X amount of time to do it. The plates go to visual, they go to X-ray. I just don't know how much we can do that stuff moving forward. So I do see scaling back, more development work, more pinpoint travel, education conferences,
Hmm.
inspection seminars, things like that, as opposed to field work. Walking a pipeline, dealing with sub-zero, up north, or 100 degrees down south, just doesn't float my boat anymore.
No, I'm not. I don't know how old you are, but that's not really floating my boat anymore either.
No.
Like, I picked the nice jobs now.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to see 5 years from now, if I was still at the nuclear plant. It's funny you ask. If I was still at the nuclear facility I worked at, my retirement day would be this coming July 23rd.
Whoa.
I would have had 35 years in. But I didn't. I only put in 11 or 12, and so But I'd like to say 5 years from now, I'll be scaling back to the point where I pick and choose big time.
Yeah, and that's a nice dream. You got the land, you got the family, and you can scale back. But I got a feeling, Rich, that you'll never be able to pull the fingernail right out of there.
No, not as long as I can stand up and talk and read a code book and communicate and relate with folks. Lord willing, um, there's a lot of that left.
Well, and as we go forward with some of these association plans, it might be real good to have a nice solid volunteer like yourself down representing, because I don't think Texas is the only place that would be maybe interested in a chapter. Like, I've talked to
Oh
other
no.
friends down in the US, and they just love this infrastructure that we have with the association, with the networking, the free education, the videos, the podcasts, the webcasts. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you get access to for free,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and like why wouldn't a
Yeah.
chapter
Oh, for
want to
sure.
get
There we do a lot of CWB 471 welder certifications in
Mhm.
Texas and in other states, Mississippi, Oklahoma, New Mexico. Because there are a fair amount of CWB certified companies in the states, and they need CWB certified welders. So, we are working on integrating more inspector training because there is reciprocation agreements with
AWS,
CWB weld
yeah.
inspector to AWS inspector, and there's some unique programs CWB has like welding supervisor. So there's a lot of appetite for CWB programming, especially the networking, and absolutely we've only discussed what's going on in Texas, but I've got a handful of other states that once we get a road paved, with the association wise, I absolutely, could you, if you tell me you're ready for another state, it's game on. Let's go.
Well, and I speak Spanish too, so I'm even looking at some of
Well, there
those
you
southern.
go.
I'm looking at some of those southern U.S. states and go, hey, there's lots of Mexican companies down there. You know, there's a lot of. There could be maybe a Spanish Latino chapter out of the
Absolutely.
U.S. You know, that would be pretty cool.
Absolutely.
You know, so
Yeah. A
that's
couple of our Texas welding teachers are actually CSRs for CWB. So we've got two teachers that are high school welding teachers, and then part time they do CSR work for the bureau, and both of them go into Mexico as much as they go anywhere. Obviously, being in Texas,
Mhm.
so yeah, that I could see a Mexico chapter if there isn't already.
Not yet, not yet. This is the first touch into the international with the association, and like I mean, because I have done so much international work, this is something that I'm keen on because I think it's cool. So,
It
all
is,
right,
and,
man.
and I think Canadian welders would and Canadian teachers would be pleasantly surprised at how much influence Canadian protocol has in the
Around the
welding
world.
industry in the
Yeah,
states. Yeah,
yeah. Well, Rich, we're coming up to the end of the show. We may have to have a part two or a part three down the
yeah,
road because there's a lot.
absolutely,
But I'm going to
absolutely.
ask you the same question I ask at the end of every show, and this is from your heart now. If you're a young person or new to the trade, say you're looking at a career change and you're looking to get into welding or some type of a weld or steel industry, what kind of advice would you give someone that's coming in right now? Like 2021, COVID's
Yep.
going on, things are tough. What's good advice for someone looking to get into the trades?
Well, other than some slang we've thrown around, paying your dues and listening and respect and all that good stuff. Be real. I see kids all the time. I want to be a pipeline welder. I want to be an underwater welder. Why do you want to do that? Because they make good kind of money. That's not being real. That's not being real. Be realistic with yourself. Look in the mirror. Where do I want to work? Is it feasible for me to leave Saskatchewan or leave Manitoba or leave Ontario or leave Texas or Louisiana? And be patient. I know I got regrets. I almost, was I knew you were going to ask that question because I heard you ask other people. I
Hmm.
don't know that I really have one regret as far as being on a job that I didn't enjoy, I didn't love, that I didn't really grow to love the people I was with. Some regrets about leaving some of those jobs for other opportunities. So that's why you got to be patient. Be realistic about what you can do and what you really want to do and you really think you will do, and not just pipe dream because you're just kidding yourself. And then be patient. The more you travel and the more you get around, the more people you're going to run into and the more opportunities you're going to have. You really need to sort out those opportunities and be realistic and patient about them, and what's best for you and your goals. Set some plans, and talk to other folks. How did that career work out for you? But be realistic and be patient would I think be the best summarize it.
Yeah, and that's great advice because I did go through some tough times in my trade life where I thought about leaving forever and I was kind of sick of it and didn't feel like it was the right angle. But I toughed it out, and a lot of it actually had to do with the guys around me. They
Yeah.
kind of talked me down and said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. You know, like maybe you're not happy where you are. Leave, find a new job, but don't abandon the trade because you're good and you're trying to be good. So if you're not happy here, it's okay to quit. Go somewhere else." And I
Yeah.
did. And it opened up a whole new world for me where I was like, I wasn't trapped, like I can make those choices, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
for sure. Be confident and just see what's out there and do your homework, and is this right for me?
mhm.
And yeah, Lord willing, you'll have a good career and you'll be able to be, like two old guys like us just kicking the can, several thousand miles apart
Yeah,
and just enjoying the heck out of it.
you bet, man. Well, thanks a lot, Rich. I've loved having you on the show. This was a ton of fun.
My
Um,
pleasure.
and thanks to all the
Anybody out
listeners.
there listening that Max can get a hold of me. I'd love to hear from folks that what you're doing now and how we met and how we work together and there's a lot of can kicking to be done.
That's probably the most excited part I see in my future is getting old and running into the old buddies and talking about
Yeah,
the old stuff because my dad was a welder too and he's in his 70s now and I see him still do it with all his
yeah,
old weld buddies and
yeah,
that's a nice thing.
yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate you having me on and thinking about me and making it happen. And best of luck to you in the future.
Awesome. And for all the people that have been tuning in, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We're doing great. The podcast is getting great reception out there. So share it, download it, let your friends know about it. And if you have any ideas for people that may be great fit for the show, send me their information. You can always get a hold of me, max.ceron@cwbgroup.org. You can get a hold of me there and keep the show growing because these stories need to get out there. This is part of the
Yeah.
community. This is part of what makes welding great. So
Yep.
thanks
Thank you,
a lot,
Max.
Rich, and take care, buddy.
Take care.
You've been listening to the CWB Association Welding Podcast with Max Ceron. If you enjoyed what you heard today, rate our podcast and visit us at cwbassociation.org to learn more. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions or suggestions on what you'd like to learn about in the future. Produced by the CWB Group and presented by Max Ceron. This podcast serves to educate and connect the welding community. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.